Chapter 13. Andres. The October evening air was crisp as gentle winds blew through the stands at Instituto St. John Baptiste Soccer Stadium. Andres' latest assignment had come from an anonymous source. It was not the first time he had taken a job from someone he had never met, but it was the first of its kind. Most of the people who hired him did so for a single purpose: to commit murder. Murder was an act that Andres loved to carry out. To think that his job allowed him to kill people in exchange for money, sex, power, and the most important commodity to Andres' kind, blood. It had been 10 years since Andres renounced his miserable human life as a policeman in exchange for a lavishly eternal one. He was still, as they called him in the vampire community, a fledgling, a slave to his wilder instincts, and he loved succumbing to them. But this time, his job had not been to kill, but to investigate. His client wanted to know the identities of El Toro Rojo and La Bruja Plata duo. It was a boring job, but it paid handsomely, so Andres had accepted it. When he started, he was in the border states of Mexico, and no one seemed to know anything about the Red Bull and Silver Witch pair. The only thing that Andres had to start with was the information he had received from his employer, that the duo was associated with the four pillars that ran Mexico, more specifically with Pablo Sanchez and Onario Gonzalez. According to his employer, the pair were hired hitmen, the type of people you send in where no one else could do the job. Andres figured that if he kept going to spots where the men of Pablo Sanchez and Onario Gonzalez frequented, he would eventually get a lead on this underground duo. His instincts were correct. In his search, Andres encountered a man who had met the team and had survived to tell the tale. According to the man who provided the information to Andres, El Toro Rojo and La Bruja de Plata were a demonic duo who had made a pact with El Diablo. It was a very popular story among mafioso footmen in Mexico. If tall tales were true, the devil would be handing out deals to every mobster, so Andres didn't think much of the story. Instead, he asked the man where he had encountered them last, and headed to the southern states. It was when he finally reached Oaxaca that he struck gold. The rumors in the city about the pair spread like wildfire, and it became apparent then that El Toro Rojo was Javier del Toro, the owner of DT and Associates Corp., the biggest weapons manufacturer in the state. It became clear to Andres then that not only was Javier del Toro a messenger of death for the four pillars, but he also supplied them with weapons, making him a key player in their organization. But even though Andres thought he had Javier del Toro figured out, he still lacked information on the Silver Witch. The people who had encountered the pair and lived to tell the tale were few and far between. But those who had actually seen La Bruja's face? There was no one who could tell Andres what she looked like. All he knew was that when she ran, she seemed to leave a path of silver hair behind her, thus earning her name, La Bruja de Plata. Reconnaissance on La Hacienda del Toro proved also difficult. The hacienda had high walls covered in vines, and though it was a large estate, its blind spots were well covered with trees and guards, who were stationed at the entry point every night. Andres was only able to take a peek into La Hacienda from the highest tree, hiding himself within the branches and leaves. Using his heightened night vision, he had been able to see between two trees, catching a glimpse of a boy, probably about 13, and a man in his mid-30s. By the way they were positioned, they were talking to someone Andres could not see, but the pitch of the voice was undeniably a girl's. Could that be his Bruja de Plata? He had to continue investigating, and after digging some more, he found out that Javier del Toro had a son, Ernesto del Toro. There wasn't much about him. It seemed he left the scene when he was about 20 years old, and had only recently returned with his son, Santiago del Toro. Santiago was even more of a mystery to Andres than Ernesto was. At least with Ernesto and Javier, he had been lucky enough to secure a couple of clippings, but there was absolutely nothing on Santiago. But that only meant he had to dig even deeper, and after a couple of calls to his vast network of contacts, he found out that Santiago del Toro attended Instituto St. John Baptiste, a prestigious and private academy for the socialites of the city of Oaxaca. True to its exclusivity, only authorized personnel could even attend the most trivial of events, such as the soccer game he was at tonight. "Here's your water," said Elias. As Andres looked to his right, a tall man with brown hair and gray eyes was towering over him. "Thanks," Andres replied. "I'm surprised you wanted to come see my son's game today. I didn't think you would be interested in watching a middle school soccer team." "I told you. There's a man here who I've been wanting to reel in as a client, but he's a hard man to get to," Andres told Elias. "His grandson plays soccer here, so I thought I might be able to make contact after the game." "Wow, always trying to get an edge, aren't you, Andres?" Elias chuckled, taking a sip of his beer. "You think so?" Andres smiled innocently, but there was, of course, nothing innocent about what he was doing. Even at an unimportant soccer game like this, the academy only allowed family members and guardians of the soccer players to attend. Anyone else had to be personally added as a +1 through the school's app, and then the app was scanned at the entrance gate. Not surprising, considering the identities of the attendees, but then again, Andres was well connected. It just so happened that one of his connections, Elias Smith, owner of the fastest growing tech company in the industry, had a son who played soccer with Santiago del Toro. He truly was lucky. It didn't take much effort for Andres to request and receive an invitation to Elias' son's game, under the guise that he had been chasing an untouchable client for weeks, and that the client would be at the game today. At least that part was true. "That client I'm trying to get to, it's Javier del Toro," Andres said, watching Elias' face for a reaction. And he was not disappointed. Elias, who was taking a chug of his beer, almost spilled it on himself at the sound of the Del Toro name. "Man, Andres," Elias laughed, "you really aim high, don't you? Well, if you ever get a meeting with Javier del Toro, you let me know how you did it. I've been trying to meet with him for years, but he constantly blows me off, even with the upper hand of being Ernesto's old classmate, and my son being his grandson's best friend." "Really?" Andres asked. "So you knew Ernesto back in school?" "Yeah," Elias said. "We actually both attended this very same academy. He was a pretty popular guy, captain of the soccer team and everything. We were pretty close back then." "What happened with you guys?" Andres asked. "Nothing interesting," Elias shrugged. "Just life, you know. At graduation, he told me that Isabella was pregnant. He couldn't have been more than 18 then. Just kids, but he looked excited, and I was excited for him. I tried reaching out to him a couple times after graduation, but never got a reply. I figured he was busy with, becoming a dad, but then I heard a rumor that he had fallen out with his dad and he had left the state, moved somewhere on the outskirts. Didn't reunite with him again until a couple years ago." That would explain why Ernesto's records went dark, Andres thought, then said, "So dad didn't improve, and so the son had no choice but to run away from home." Elias shrugged again. "I'm not really sure. Ernesto was always really private about his home life at school. But there was a rumor that went around that his dad was involved with some shady people. But," Elias said loudly, "I always try not to pay attention to the rumors, you know." Andres wanted to roll his eyes, but didn't. The point of the whole conversation was coming up. "What do you think of his grandson?" Elias shifted uncomfortably. I'm pretty busy with work and hardly ever home, so I've only seen him a couple of times in passing." "So, in conclusion, you're a neglectful parent and absolutely no further use to me. Great." "You must think I'm a crappy father," Elias said, sensing disapproval in Andres. Andres shook his head. "I don't. Now remind me, which one is yours?" "Walter. He's the one with glasses. He's a little dorky," Elias smiled, pointing warmly at the soccer field. Andres followed Elias's finger to a stick-thin boy with brown hair and sport glasses on his face. He seemed to be out of breath from all the running. The ball was passed to him, and he was surprised that it was in his possession. The boy ran and tried to make a pass, but failed, allowing the opposing team to take hold of the ball. He raised his hands to his face, as if frustrated. Another young boy with sunshine blonde hair came up behind him, patting his back in consolation. Andres watched as the blonde boy whispered something in his ear and then ran off, giving Walter a thumbs up as he did. Immediately the other boy seemed more chipper and picked up the pace, running after the ball with the blonde sunshine-haired boy. Guess they are friends, Andres mumbled to himself, confirming that the boy was Santiago del Toro. Unlike Walter, Santiago had a little bit more meat on his bones. Still thin because of his age, but not so bony. He looked sturdier and confident. Andres watched him give orders to his teammates and thought that the boy truly did carry himself like a natural-born leader. Santiago's jersey had the number 13 etched on the back of it, and Andres couldn't help but smile. What bad luck for him, and good luck for Andres. Taking his eye off the boy, Andres scanned the stands below him. It took him a while to locate his target, but he found him. In the distance, a man with black hair and a black stubble stood in the stands, yelling and clapping. Ernesto del Toro, the current heir of the Del Toro Empire. Come on, Santiago! Andres looked next to Ernesto at a girl in khaki cargo pants and a black long-sleeve tank top. It was hard to really see her face because she was wearing a black hat, but she was yelling with excitement and standing too close to Ernesto for them to not have a semblance of familiarity with each other. He straightened with interest. Could this be his silver witch? Who's that, next to Ernesto? Andres asked Elias. Elias squinted, trying to find Ernesto in the sands. When Elias had located them, he squinted his eyes even harder, then opened his mouth and closed it again, as if trying to figure it out. Andres tapped his foot impatiently. No clue, honestly. All the screen time is killing my eyesight, Elias said, rubbing his eyes and disappointing Andres. You've never seen that girl? Andres urged. Elias squinted at the opposite stands again, his eyes becoming smaller the harder he squinted. I really have no idea, he shrugged. Andres tried to hide his displeasure as best as he could, but he was annoyed with Elias. Walter hasn't told you if Santiago has a girlfriend or something? At this, Elias got awkward again. Walter and I don't talk much. Like I said, I'm not really home. This is actually the first game of the season I've ever been able to attend. Andres did not bother hiding his frustration with Elias this time. His eyes turned towards the girl again. As far as he could see, she looked fair, with pale skin and a tall, thin frame. Had he seen her hanging around La Hacienda before? Andres tried to rack his brain, but he didn't think so. He would have made a note of it. Perhaps she's a family member? A distant cousin? But no, Andres had studied the family tree. Javier only had a sister, and she was dead. The sister died young, so no living heirs. Javier's parents were also dead. It was truly just the three of them. Javier, Ernesto, and Santiago. Perhaps a friend then? He thought back to the voice he heard Santiago and Ernesto talking to that day when he was at La Hacienda. Could this truly be his silver witch? She was far too young. Andres put her at 15, 16 at the most, and yet the idea gnawed at him. He saw her get up, and he immediately followed her.